You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we preview the T20 International Series between Australia and England. It's the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the T20 International Series fixture between Australia and England for this T20 International Series. The first T20 International will be played at the Perth Stadium on the 9th of October. The second and third T20 Internationals will be both played at Manuka Oval on the 12th of October and on the 14th of October. Let's have a look at the T20 International stats between Australia and England. Head-to-head in T20 Internationals overall, Australia lead 10 to England's 9. Both teams' records in Australia in terms of T20s. Australia lead that 7 to England's 1. Leading run scorer Aaron Finch with 594 runs. Leading wicket-taker Mitchell Johnson, Adil Rashid and Chris Jordan with 11. Most dismissals, Joss Butler with 10. Most catches, David Warner with 9. Most matches, Owen Morgan with 14. And the first T20 international match between Australia and England was back in 2005. Let's have a look at both Australia's and England's T20 international squads. Let's have a look at Australia's T20 international squad and talk about some of the challenges facing Australia in this T20 international series. Now, for this T20 International Series against England, Australia have named 2 squads for this series. They've named a squad for the first game, and they've named a squad for the second and third games. So let's have a look at those squads. So the first T20 squad for Game 1 of this series is Finch, Abbott, Ashton Agar, David, Ellis, Green, Inglis, Mitchell Marsh, Kane Richardson, Sams, Smith, Stornis, Swepson, Wade and Warner. And for games 2 and 3, the squad is Finch, Abbott, Ashton Agar, Cummins, David, Green, Hazelwood, Inglis, Mitchell Marsh, Maxwell, Kane Richardson, Sams, Smith, Stark, Stornis, Wade and Warner. So those are the 2 squads that Australia have announced for this T20 National Series against England. Now, for the first T20 National, the players who Australia have included into that squad are Ashton Agar, Stornis, Kane Richardson, Mitchell Marsh, Swepson and Ellis. The players who have missed out are Adam Zampa, Mitchell Stark, Josh Hazelwood, Cummins and Maxwell. For the second and third games, the changes to the squad there, Adam Zampa, Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins and Maxwell will come back in for games 2 and 3. And Cricket Australia haven't really advised anyone on who will be left out of that squad come the second and third games. So that's what Australia have done in this series. They're thinking about the long term. They're giving the main bowlers in Zampa, Stark, Hazelwood and Cummins a rest. Glenn Maxwell not playing in this series. He's been rested. He's been managed after playing against India and the West Indies. So Australia thinking about the long term, but it gives an opportunity for Ashton Agar, Kane Richardson, who are coming back from injury, to get some game time. Same with Mitchell Marsh, who's coming back from an ankle injury. And same with Marcus Stornis, who's coming back from a side strain. So it gives those players an opportunity to get some game time because they're going to be a part of this T20 World Cup for Australia. And they're a part of the squad, despite what people have said about Marcus Stornis or, Cameron Green should be in the side and all that stuff. But it will give an opportunity for them to be a part of the squad, get some game time, and get some runs or wickets under their belt because they haven't played much cricket over the last few weeks or months. Now let's talk about Australia's batting. Now Australia have some areas to improve on. Now we talked about this in the West Indies series for Australia. They had some batting collapses and some batters are under a bit of a form slump. So we'll talk about the batting collapses. They had some batting collapses against the West Indies. Now, in this series against England and going into the T20 World Cup, it's something that Australia need to address. We see it too many times with Australia where they're in a good position and all of a sudden they lose wickets and have a collapse. Now, you can't afford to do that in the T20 World Cup. So for Australia, it's about trying to improve the batting, making sure we're doing the basics right, building partnerships, getting in and getting set, rotate the strike, look to rotate the strike on a consistent basis, don't get bogged down, all those basics, and build partnerships. We saw in the West Indies series, the batting was a bit up and down. The first game, they had a batting collapse, and they nearly lost the first game, but Matthew Wade got the job done and finished off the job as he always does for Australia. And he's been doing that wonderfully over the last year and a bit for Australia, even going back to the T20 World Cup in that semi-final against Pakistan. Ever since that innings, he's got the job done for Australia. In Game 2, it was a much better batting performance, and they still had a little bit of a collapse there. So that's something they need to work on in this series against England. Now, Glenn Maxwell, Marcus Stoinis, Steve Smith, Mitchell Marsh. It's a big series for them. Those batters I've named are struggling for form. And they're struggling big time. We'll start with Glenn Maxwell. Now, Glenn Maxwell's not playing Game 1, but he's playing Game 2 and 3. He's out of form. He needs some runs. His recent T20 international innings includes India and the West Indies. He's got 1-0-6-0-1. That's not pretty good from Glenn Maxwell. So his last few innings in T20 internationals against India and the West Indies, 1-0-6-0-1. Not good. He needs some runs. He's under pressure. He needs some runs to really cement his spot in this T20 World Cup squad for Australia. Let's talk about Marcus Stoinis. He's out of form. He hasn't been playing a lot of cricket. He's been out with a side strain, but he's been struggling in T20 cricket for Australia for some time. And now with Australia having Cameron Green, he's not going to be a part of the T20 World Cup squad, but certainly for the future, is certainly targeting Marcus Stoinis' spot in this T20 side. You've also got Tim David, who could challenge Marcus Stoinis for a spot in the 11, because Tim David's done well. We saw that in the last game against the West Indies, where he got that quick 540. We saw the last game against India, he got that half century. So with Tim David in the squad, Marcus Stoinis is under pressure. He needs some runs. Now, the recent T20 international innings for Marcus Stoinis, the last T20 international series he played against Sri Lanka, and that was in Sri Lanka a few months ago when Australia were touring Sri Lanka. The scores in that series were 23, 9 and 38. So nothing special. The last T20 International 50 that Marcus Stoinis has scored was 78 versus New Zealand. That was in Dunedin. And that was back in the T20 series against Australia and New Zealand in New Zealand. And that was on the 25th of February 2021. So he hasn't done much since then, Marcus Stoinis. And there's a lot of pressure on him. He's got to have a good series with the bat. Mitchell Marsh, let's talk about him. Important batter for Australia. Now, the last T20 World Cup, he batted at number 3, and he did very well, following a very good Big Bash after that as well. And for many years in the Big Bash, he was performing, doing well at number 3, made that spot his own, and he certainly made that spot his own in this Australia T20 World Cup side, especially in last year's T20 World Cup. He needs some game time to get some rhythm back. Obviously, he came back for the first game against the West Indies. He looked a bit scratchy. He's a rhythm player. He needs to play a lot of games to get into some rhythm. So for Mitchell Marsh, these 3 games against England, definitely the warm-up match against India, are going to be very important for him. Steve Smith, his spot is still questionable in this side. Now, we saw in the West Indies series that he didn't play in Game 1. Aaron Finch decided to bat at number 4 and bat down the order. Because Cameron Green was opening the batting with David Warner, wasn't he? So Steve Smith's side is still a bit of a question mark in this T20 World Cup side. Does he get a spot? Does he get an opportunity? We don't know. But he's under pressure. He's got to really lift his tempo and his strike rate, because that's the criticism from Steve Smith, is his strike rate. Can he increase the strike rate in this series against England? We shall see. Now, the last question about Australia's batting is, will Aaron Finch open or bat down the order? Now, Australia do have Cameron Green in this T20 series against England, even though he won't be a part of the T20 World Cup. Will Aaron Finch open with David Warner, or will it be Cameron Green to open with Warner, and then Aaron Finch goes down the order? Now, seeing that Mitchell Marsh and Marcus Stoinis are fit, raring to go, I don't think Aaron Finch will probably do that, because it's very important that Australia start to play their T20 World Cup 11 in this series against Australia. Nothing against Cameron Green, I think he's brilliant, but he's not a part of the squad. So why play Cameron Green if he's not a part of the T20 World Cup squad? He's just taken up a spot there. So I think Aaron Finch will probably open with Warner, and then you've got Marsh at 3, and then you've got Marcus Stoinis coming back at probably at number 5. And then, obviously, Tim David will probably play as well, because there's no Glenn Maxwell in the first game. So I don't think he'll do that in this series, Aaron Finch. I think he will just be status quo and he'll open the batting. We shall see on that. But looking at Australia's batting, there's still a lot of areas to improve on. And hopefully in this series against England, they can start to iron out those problems they have with their batting. Let's talk about Australia's bowling. Now, Australia's bowling's in pretty good shape. The series against the West Indies, Stark, Hazlewood, Cummins and Zampa were taking wickets, and they were bowling quite well. Now, for the first game of this series, Australia won't have Stark, Cummins, Hazlewood or Zampa for Game 1, but they'll be back for Game 2 and Game 3. Now, that's because of workloads and management, but also travelling from Brisbane to Perth's quite a long journey. And Australia are thinking about the long term in terms of, we want these bowlers to be fresh going into the T20 World Cup, which I think is a sensible move, because at the end of the day, this series does not really count. It's a warm-up series. It's about preparing, working out problems and solving problems, and making sure everyone's in good physical condition, good touch with both bat and ball in terms of form, going into the T20 World Cup. So it gives an opportunity for Ashton Agar, Kane Richardson, who are a part of Australia's T20 World Cup squad. Both of them haven't played a lot of cricket. And it's the same with Marcus Stoinis and Mitchell Marsh with the batting side of things. It's important for Ashton Agar, Kane Richardson, a part of the T20 World Cup squad, a part of the bowling attack. They need to take some wickets and they need to get some rhythm with their bowling. So they need game time in this series against against England, I should say. So it's a good opportunity for them to really show the selectors that, we're in good touch, we're taking wickets, and we're going to be ready, if required, during the tournament, if we're going to decide to leave out Stark, Cummins or Hazlewood from game to game during the tournament, depending on conditions and depending on how they're feeling in terms of workload and management. The one thing for Australia need to work on in this series against England is their deft bowling. A little bit against the West Indies, bowling towards the end of the innings in those 2 games, they were a bit off. Leaking runs, mis-execution of skills. So that's something they need to tighten up on. But besides from that, the bowling attack, the main attack of Stark, Cummins, Hazlewood and Zampa are taking wickets. They look in pretty good shape headed into the T20 World Cup, which is good signs for Australia. Good signs if you're an Australian supporter. Not a good sign if you're the opposition. But obviously for Australia's bowling, it's in good shape. They look pretty good. Game 1, there will be a bit light on the bowling, but games 2 and 3, obviously the main bowlers will come back and hopefully do well in those 2 remaining games when they come back in the series. So overall, the Australian bowling attack's in good shape. A few areas to work on, but I think they're in good shape leading into the T20 World Cup. Let's have a look at England's T20 international squad and talk about some of the challenges facing England in this T20 international series. So England's squad for this T20 international series against Australia: Butler, Ali, Brooke, Sam Curran, Hales, Jordan, Livingston, Milan, Rashid, Salt, Stokes, Topley, Willie, Wokes and Wood. And the standby players for England, Dawson, Gleeson and Mills. That's the squad England have selected for this short series against Australia. Now, England are coming off a series win against Pakistan. They won that T20 International Series in Pakistan 4-3 in the best of 7. They were 3-2 behind in that series and they came back to win the series. So the batters and bowlers did well in that series for England and come into this series with confidence against Australia and hopefully with confidence leading into the T20 World Cup. Jos Buttler returns from a calf injury, didn't play in the series against Pakistan, but he's confirmed he's 100% fit and raring to go, so he'll take his place behind the stumps and captain this England T20 side in this series and also heading into the T20 World Cup. He also confirmed, Josh Buttler, that Liam Livingstone, who's a part of England's T20 World Cup squad, has a bit of an injury concern. As we know, he's a bit touch and go, Buttler said. He's got that ankle injury. He's been named in the squad, so he's a bit touch and go for the T20 World Cup, and his involvement in this series against England is uncertain. Ben Stokes returns to the England T20 squad. Obviously, he's been named in the T20 World Cup squad. Ben Stokes, he didn't play in the series against Pakistan. He was having a rest, but he's in this squad for this series against Australia and also for the T20 World Cup as well. So looking at this squad that England have selected, it's a pretty good squad. It's a strong squad. Let's talk about the batting. Now, England's batters had a pretty good series in Pakistan. Alex Hales scored 130 runs, scored a half-century. Salt, 167 runs. He got one half-century. Milan, 174 runs, one half-century. Ali, 142 runs with two half-centuries. And Harry Brook, the young Harry Brook, 238 runs with one half-century. So, looking at those numbers, the England batters had a very good series in Pakistan. And that's good signs for England going into this series against Australia, but also the T20 World Cup as well. So they're in good touch, they're in good form. The question for England is, who will open the batting with Buttler? Now, Buttler's returned to the side after that calf injury that he picked up. Didn't play in Pakistan, as we mentioned before. Now, the question is, who will open the batting with him? Will it be Alex Hales? Will it be Phil Salt? Both of those opened the batting with each other in Pakistan when Buttler was out of the side. So it's a bit of a showdown between Hales and Salt in this series against England, for England against Australia, in terms of who will get that opening spot with Buttler. It's a bit of a toss of a coin. Both of them can do the role very well. As we've seen the numbers, Hales 130 runs, Salt 167. Both of them batted well in Pakistan. Both of them have had experience in Australia, playing in the Big Bash. Alex Hales has played for the Sydney Thunder for many years. He'll be playing for them again in this Big Bash coming up. Phil Salt, he's played with the Adelaide Strikers, so both of them know Australian conditions, and both of them will probably do well in this T20 World Cup. But that's the question for Buttler and the England selectors and Matthew Mott, the coach. Who's going to open with Josh Buttler, either Hales or Salt? So in this series against Australia, England will need to try and both of them out with Buttler. Try, Alex Hales in one game, try Salt in the other game to see which partnership works. It's very important to have a very good opening partnership and a stable opening partnership as well. So that'll be interesting to see how England go with that. Buttler, let's talk about him. He's going to be under pressure. He hasn't played for a while, missed out due to injury. His captaincy will be put to the test not only in this series against Australia, but also in the T20 World Cup as well. The captaincy hasn't been his friend. He's been out of form since he's taken over from Owen Morgan, who's retired a few months ago. So for Buttler, it will be interesting to see how he goes in terms of his form with the bat and also with the gloves and the captaincy. It's a lot of burden placed on him, being captain, being a batter, and being a keeper. Doing three jobs at once is not easy. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes as the keeper, batter, and the captain of this England side. And also Ben Stokes. Let's talk about him. He's been named in this T20 World Cup squad. He hasn't played a T20 since 2021 against India, and that was back in Ahmedabad. So it's been a long time since he's played T20 cricket, Ben Stokes. Hasn't played for a while, as I mentioned. Hasn't been a part of England's best T20 side, to be honest. But got into the squad due to Johnny Bairstow getting injured, unfortunately. So that's why Ben Stokes got an opportunity in this T20 World Cup squad. The last T20 World Cup Stokes played was back in 2016. So be interesting to see how Ben Stokes go. England have said he will bat at number 4 in this T20 team for England heading into the T20 World Cup. Be interesting to see how he goes in terms of his form with the bat. He's been a bit up and down, even in the test matches, Ben Stokes with the bat. He's been good and then he's been off. So For him, it's a long time playing T20 cricket, trying to get back into the swing of things. Will that affect him? Let's see how he goes against Australia, but also let's see how he goes in the T20 World Cup. But as I said, England have got very strong batters. It looks a pretty good lineup. I think they'll do well in this T20 World Cup, and they'll probably do well in this series against England. So for England, the questions they need to answer is who will open the batting with Buttler? Will it be Hales or Salt? How will Ben Stokes go after a long layoff from T20 cricket? Will he be rusty? Or will he struggle? We won't know. And it will be interesting to see how Buttler will go with the bat, also with the captaincy and the gloves as well. But overall, looks a pretty strong unit from England in terms of the batting. I think they'll do well, and I think they'll have some success in this series, but also in the T20 World Cup as well. Let's talk about the bowling for England. Let's talk about the bowlers. They did pretty well in Pakistan, the bowlers. They had a bit of a mixed bag in terms of results, but they got the job done in the end, and they were able to execute their skills and win the series for England. Let's have a look at the wicket takers in that series. Ali took a wicket. Wokes took 4 wickets. Mark Wood took 6. Willie took 7. Topley 5. Rashid took 5 wickets. Sam Curran took 7 wickets. And Richard Gleeson took a wicket. And Liam Dawson took a wicket. Obviously, Gleeson and Dawson are the standby players for England in this T20 squad. So, as I said, a bit of a mixed result for the bowlers for England in that series against Pakistan, but they still got the job done, and in England were able to win that series in the end 4-3 in the best of 7. Now, the biggest question that I have for this England bowling lineup is, can this attack win the T20 World Cup for England? Now, you have a look at this England bowling lineup, the likes of Sam Curran, Chris Jordan, Stokes, Topley, Willie, Wokes, they're all a bit samey. They're all a bit same pace. Nearly all of them bowl right arm. There's no variety in terms of a left armer in the side. They're all a bit samey, and they're all at that medium pace. Now, we know with England over the years, when they come to Australia, they struggle with the bowling because of the pitches and because they lack the X factor of pace. The only one who bowls 140 plus is Mark Wood. But as we know with Mark Wood, he's injury prone. So England will have to manage him well in this T20 World Cup, because they can't afford to let him break down. If he breaks down, then they're in deep trouble with their bowling. Their batting is very good. Their bowling is lacking that X factor of pace. Now, it would have been nice for England if they had Jofra Archer in the side. As we know, he's coming back from injury, and his return to international cricket is uncertain. He'll probably never make it back, we don't know. So with England, they do have a lack of fast bowling in the country. So Mark Wood is their X-factor bowler here in Australia. And this attack, the likes of Wokes, Willie, Topley, Stokes, Sam Curran, Chris Jordan, when they play matches in this T20 World Cup, because England will play matches in Perth and in Brisbane during the T20 World Cup, and also the first game of this series against Australia will be in Perth. Can their bowlers be effective on those fast, bouncy surfaces? I think they're not going to be as effective because they don't have that pace. And for medium paces on good surfaces like in Perth, like in Brisbane, batters from the opposition are just going to eat you up. And especially here in Australia, if you don't have any variations or anything with your bowling, if you don't swing it or you don't have any variations, you're going to struggle. Now, we know with the England bowlers that they do have some variations, but they don't have the pace to hurry the batters up on those surfaces in Perth or Brisbane. That's the concern that England have. They've got Mark Wood. He can definitely cause a few problems at the Gabba or in Perth, but is he going to play all the games? He probably isn't. He's probably going to be managed because England know we can't afford him to get broken down because, we haven't got the extra pace. They've got Tyrell Mills as one of these standby players who can bowl some pace as well, but he's also injury prone as well. So it's mainly Mark Wood who is going to be their biggest X factor with the bowling. So it'll be interesting to see how England go in terms of the first game at Perth. How do they go about trying to be effective on fast, bouncy surfaces. Because, as I mentioned, they'll play games in Perth and also in Brisbane for this T20 World Cup. Pitches that are fast and bouncy. And, if you have someone who can bowl 140 plus, will be a handful. They've got Mark Wood who can do that. But as I said, he's injury prone. So I want to see how they go in this first game in Perth with their bowlers. And how will they go about taking wickets on these fast, bouncy surfaces, knowing that most of our bowlers are medium paces and they can't seem to be effective in either Perth or Brisbane. So it'll be interesting to see how they go there. So that's the only question of concern I have for England. They're pretty good T20 bowlers. They've done pretty well in various leagues around the world. But the main question for England is, can this attack win the T20 World Cup? That remains to be seen. Due to the lack of pace and the lack of effectiveness from this attack. But we shall see how England go about things in this series with their attack and also going into the T20 World Cup. Let's predict who's going to win this T20 International Series and the leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for the series. Now, the series winner. I think this series could go either way. Both Australia and England are pretty strong teams, and both of them are definitely favourites leading into the T20 World Cup. But in saying that, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who wins this series, either Australia or England. Both teams are looking to prepare in and warm up for the series heading into the T20 World Cup. So really, this series could go either way. Both teams could win it. But at the end of the day, both teams wouldn't care much about winning this series. It's all about preparation, getting ready for the T20 World Cup, which starts in a few weeks' time. Leading run scorer for the series, I think David Warner may be the leading run scorer for the series. He had a pretty good last game against the West Indies. He's starting to get into the runs. As I said, he scored 70-odd in the last game against the West Indies. So he could be the leading run scorer for this series. Leading wicket taker for the series, I'm going to go with Mitchell Starc. I know Mitchell Starc's not going to be available for the first game of this series. He's going to be playing the last two games, that's for sure. And I think he could be the leading wicket taker for this series. He had a pretty good series against the West Indies, taking wickets, and that's good signs for Australia going forward. Those are my predictions for this T20 International Series. If you're listening to this episode of the podcast on YouTube, let us know in the comments, who do you think will win the series, and your predictions for leading run scorer and leading wicket taker for this T20 International Series. It would be great to hear your predictions and thoughts. Important two games for both teams leading into the T20 World Cup. Australia, defending champions, will be looking to improve and get better as they try and fine-tune their squad ahead of their title defence. For England, these three games are very important as they look to prepare for the T20 World Cup. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.